Jerry is also founding president of Pioneer Valley Cohousing, which is a cohousing community of 32 households in Massachusetts in the USA. And they use sociocracy and dynamic governance since 2012. With Ted Rao, he wrote a book called Who Decides, Who Decides, and Many Voices, One Song, the Sociocracy Manual. Jerry has taught sociocracy workshop in the US, in Canada, in Brazil, in Italy, as well as in the UK. Without further ado, Jerry, over to you, and thank you very much again for coming along today, and I'm very much looking forward to learning more and getting to grips with all the tools available.
My pleasure to be here. I've in my life I haven't really traveled very much, so I'm really pleased to be able to like talk to people where I've been to I've been to Glasgow and Edinburgh, so as a U.S. person to be able to have a sense that of who the place that you are sitting in is meaningful to me, I guess. Just a little bit more of a sense of connection. Yeah, I was just thinking of the quote from Audre Lorde. You cannot tear down the master's house with the master's tools. And so when I look at extractive capitalism and everywhere we've come to in our world today, that I don't want to have just the same top-down anti-movement, a movement to take down the thing that is there that uses the same kind of mechanisms, the same kind of attitudes. So even though the content may be supposedly better, the means would still be the same, and how would that not corrupt, the end product? So that's in a sense what has always drawn me to social change work, is how can we do this really on the basis of every voice mattering, everybody's needs mattering. So yeah, so I've been a nonviolent activist for all my life. I really started out against organizing against nuclear power as an expression of extreme capital intensive, financial intensive. Didn't provide jobs. Provided, being capital intensive, it was in favor of the large corporations, as opposed to the renewables, which were clearly many more jobs and much more distributed, or at least in theory. Now we have these giant solar farms, which is not exactly the vision I had in mind, but so that's kind of where I've come from. And when I encountered Sociocracy, I just fell in love with it because it took care of the couple of problems that I was having with the way I was organizing. One was the problem of consensus and how the challenges that I was facing with that, although I liked the theory of it. And the other is organizing in scale, other than just one collective. How does a larger group of people stay connected and organized? And I appreciated how Sociocracy kind of solved those things, at least so far. There's still big questions like, okay, how do we organize, thousands of people? That might be still challenging with the sociocratic concept, but we have to work our way there and see what happens when we get to be that big. All right, so we have this session. My focus is going to be on sort of the basic overview. I'm assuming, I heard that there's a variety of experience in this group, which is great. I am sort of framing this towards fairly beginners, but hopefully then it'll give space for the questions from people who have more experience. So I'm going to do the basic overview, going to focus on selection process, and that'll be the first hour, and then the second hour, more or less, is going to focus on organizational structure. Then the next session is going to focus much more on the meeting process. How do we do consent decision making? How do we deal with objections? How do we generate proposals? Meeting agenda style. So that's the intentions. There's an intent to have a break. Sometimes I just kind of keep plowing through, so you can remind me, just like, hey, it's a long time without a break, so please remind me as we go along. And you do if you have the link, you can put questions here into what we call the backlog, which is the place for things that we're going to deal with in the future. Some of these questions we might answer in the course of this session, but you can go back here and add more questions after the session's over or between now and next time, and that'll help me, make sure that I pay attention to your questions. So when I think of organizing, there's two elements to it. One is the things that we want to get done. We want to change in policy, about how government is dealing with climate. And in order to get those things done, we need to be working with people. We need to be working with each other, listening, communicating, planning, doing things with each other. So it's this balance of getting things done in the context of people and community. And sometimes we just think about the getting things done and we lose track of the people, and that's part of what makes it hard. Then it makes it painful. It makes it not so much fun. Climate crisis is awful and painful, but working towards it with our peers should be joyful, because look at the wonderful people that we gather around us when we do this work. So we want to make sure that we balance those two elements. And when we think about sociocracy, I start off with just a word, and it kind of says it in a way. Ocracy is the governance. How do we steer? And socio is the socios, the associates, those who work together. So sociocracy is an approach to governance based upon the people who are in contact with each other making the decisions, not the distant people that we elect and then who make decisions for us. There are three kind of core elements from my perspective on what sociocracy is. And it has its roots in the various historical aspects of where sociocracy has come from. And I want to say also that sociocracy is a kind of a collection of best practices. It is not a static thing, and it is not it was not newly invented all of a sudden in 1971 or something. I mean, the origins of talking in rounds with circles is like, thousands of years old. So, but the near history that I'm conscious of is that the element of decision-making by consent really kind of started out in a school in the Netherlands called Der Werkplaats, Quaker school. Quakers have that aspect of belief or sense of there is that of God in every one of us, so that we are all precious. All our voices matter. Different style than having a minister in front and preaching and telling the people what to do. This is to sit in the square facing each other as equals. And so in this school, the teachers and the students made decisions together as equals about what they would learn and how they would learn. One of the students in that school was a man named Gerard Endenburg. He went on to become an electrical engineer and wound up inheriting at some point, he worked his way up in family business, but wound up getting control of Endenburg Elektroniek, which made electronic parts for the Dutch industry. And he brought to that the sense of the importance of feedback. Engineering is really strong on feedback, systems theories, cybernetics, and so you do something, you try it out, you get your feedback, you improve it, a standard kind of engineering and software development, etc. But that notion of continuous evolution by feedback was really key. And the third element, organizational structure by linked circles, is kind of taking its roots from systems theory, from nature, of just looking at, it's kind of like a biomimicry, looking at how human beings are set up. There's many systems in me, the lymphatic, the blood, the circulatory, the respiratory, all these different systems, if you will, and they all collaborate together. And the more we learn about how trees and fungi, etc., work together, it's kind of amazing just what relationship there is between all living creatures, in our Gaia, in our living planet. So those are the three elements, the three core elements. And consent being the distinction between consent and majority vote on the one hand, because majority vote has winners and losers. So that means not every voice counts. And in the way our political systems often get set up, it becomes a seesaw. Party A wins this year, Party B wins the next year, Party A wins again 2 years later, and progress is very hard to achieve. And it's worse in the United States because of our political system. Europe, at least some parts of Europe, have more of a parliamentary system, and there's some way of incrementally improving. The other, yeah, so the problems with, I'll talk more about consensus later, but maybe, let's see if I want to say anything more here. All of these three elements are really organized to, or in support of the organization accomplishing its aims, its purpose. So how do we steer, and this is kind of a steering wheel, how do we steer our organization towards the aim? And there isn't a straight line because life isn't like that, right? And like you can't ride a bicycle from here to there without steering. It isn't just simply a straight line because things happen, different. And you know that from organizing against the climate crisis is you do this and then the government does that and then you do something else. You're constantly trying to steer with the changing dynamics of what's going on in the world. Underlying the focus towards the aim is, if I can get this thing to click, here we go, are the values of being effective and being egalitarian. So we want to be effective, we want to get things done, but we don't want to be effective in the way, say, the Russian army is being effective in the Ukraine, bomb the heck out of things and make things happen. That's very effective. But it is not, of course, including the voices of people who are being bombed. On the other hand, we don't want to just be egalitarian and not get things done. There are some groups who will just talk and talk and talk and want to make sure that they're so deep in making sure that everyone's voice is heard that you don't notice that you have to balance out the listening with the doing. It's both and. Okay, what I want to do here, and this is the breakout. This is the breakout time. I want to send you into small groups, and this is kind of a prep for the next part. But I want you to go into small groups and have a discussion, however you do it in your group, about your experiences with kind of good and bad meetings. What are those meetings from hell that you've been to? What have been the really wonderful things that have happened in meetings? And just share some stories with each other. And then afterwards, we're going to set up a process for the report out, but we won't get there yet. So I just want you to relaxedly have a conversation with your small group, get to know each other a little bit, talk about your experiences. Clear enough? There's no right and wrong, just talk. For me, ideally, there's never an impasse. Yes, there was a scattering of nominations, and I call them nominations, not votes, just to keep away from the mindset of voting, because voting leads us to thinking majority rule, and this is not majority rule. Although having a majority support, nominate one person is useful information, but not the defining information. So ideally, as a facilitator, I'd be listening to the reasons that were given and what was most compelling to me as facilitator and what I heard. So there was 2, 2, and 1. I would still pick somebody. It could be the one, or it could be one of the two. It probably would not be somebody who was not nominated at all. But I would, because I don't have any information then for them. But I would pick one and say, okay, on the basis of what I've heard, because I want to move this process along. I don't want to get stuck in an endless round of not making a decision. I'm going to propose this person for these reasons. Do we have consent? And do the consent check. Because often in these groups, any one of us would be fine. And we're looking for good enough for now, safe enough to try. We're not looking for the best one. We don't need the best one for this role. We just need someone who's good enough. Because we all know sociocracy, we all know the process, and we can all support the facilitator, right? Ideally, that's where we're headed. Sometimes what I do, if it becomes, there's two clear people, and I might say, okay, with the two of you, let's just say a few things, each of you, and let the two of you speak. And when we do that, we often find that one of the two is like, well, I don't really want to do this, or something or other, or this is more challenging, or I really want, and so just a little bit of words from those two people might make that choice clearer. And then the facilitator can say, okay, thank you. Having heard what I've just heard, I will propose this person. So that's the selection process. And here we just selected one person, but when you are practiced and it's just efficient, you can select all the roles, all the core process roles, like leader, or convener, whatever you call it in your group, coordinator, facilitator, secretary, delegate. We'll talk more about the roles, but you could actually select all the roles at once, and it just takes a little bit of practice to do that. Any reflections? So those of you who observed, or those of you who are in the circles, anything you want to say about what you witnessed? Again, questions or insights that are coming up for you with the process. Patriarchy, the unspoken system in the room at most meetings, and how often male voices assume more weight, more importance, more knowledge, etc. And often females have the same view, so silence themselves. Does sociocracy method manage this without naming it? Or does it receive some direct attention sometimes? Patriarchy is a system that prefers not to be named or thought about. I think the practice really depends on the group. But for those of us who are conscious of these things, then I think it's important to bring them up. For me, part of every meeting is, at the very least, is the evaluation of the meeting at the end. And we can say, how was this meeting for us? What worked well? What didn't work so well? What could be improved in our production and in our process, in our relations? And then I would want to say, I notice that, men speak longer and louder, and the women often are silent. And I'm just concerned about that. I would like to have more of a sense of everyone's voices really being fully heard. And so that's the piece of feedback that can start that. And then you can say, I'd like to actually put this on the agenda. So that not just the content of how we're going to organize the next rally, but let's put on the agenda how we are finding our voices in this group and what's our experience of that. And so then you can do rounds, and each person can speak to how they are finding their voice, how they're struggling, what would support them in speaking up. So it becomes a conscious process. So that's often what I would wind up saying is, there's not something in sociocracy, because sociocracy is kind of an empty tool in a way. It just says equal, it supports equivalence of voice, but it doesn't talk about any of the dynamics of why you might not have equivalence of voice, and those you need to bring forth as you experience them, and make it intentional. Chloe, do you want to respond to that, or anything else you want to say with what I've just said?
No, I like your response. Lots of food for thought. Thank you very much.
It's one of the things that I always love about sociocracy over a period of time is watching the quieter people, or the introverts, or whoever sort of doesn't claim as much of a space for themselves, find it over time as they realize, oh, it's around, it's my turn to speak. oh, blush, blush, I don't know what to say. And 3 months later, you know, now they're speaking up. They're taking their turn fully. There's one person in my living community who was one of those folks who would just absolutely turn red whenever it was her turn to speak. And at some point, you know, a few years in, just in a public meeting, having her tease one of the sort of the big shot men in a loving, caring, funny way. And it's like, wow, she has come a long way. And it's the context that's supporting her to come forth. That's what I would like for everyone. Okay. So this next part, I'm going to go through a bunch of slides. Structure, and so we, you know, the 3 parts: the feedback, continuous evolution through feedback. So you notice that was very much present in the selection process, and consent decision making very much present in the selection process. We'll come back to those, but now we'll talk about structure and roles. And the first piece here to say is sociocracy is wanting to drive decision making to the grassroots as much as possible, you know, how as appropriate. So rather than decisions being made at the center, at the you know, board of directors level, or the coordinating circle level, or the general circle, whatever you might call it, anchor circle, that we're moving out into as much as possible out. And so we're going to then talk about what that all looks like. Here I just want to go through several kind of frames of how we can be organized to make decisions and see what we think of them. So imagine you are a good-sized group and you meet all together. Your intent is to make decisions, you know, in the large group. So let's say by consensus. What works well? What would be some of the good effects of trying to make decisions this way, the smiley face, and what would be some of the challenges of trying to make decisions in this way? And if you just go ahead, and I can see many of you now, but can you just unmute and speak up and say, this would be a good thing about making decisions in this kind of organization, and what would be challenging?
I was going to say something challenging would be if everyone was, that things would take a long time. If you were going round and round and round and hearing from everyone and doing the kind of process that we just did, it would take a very long time.
Yeah, and
so
let's not, I'm not assuming sociocracy for this.
Okay.
But, you know, it's large group decision making, can take a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen.
Exactly. Long time.
Long time. Okay. Anything else that would be challenging or that would be positive about this? Ailsa, and then
now that I know the sort of the full question, one thing I found in large groups trying to obtain consensus, and it was across 3 working groups of about maybe 30 people. And there was a particularly strong personality who wanted their group not to have a job anymore and wanted to put it onto a different group, which was perceived as the junior group. And as a member of the junior group, I very much believed that the higher ups should take responsibility for this task. And it was a challenge to, because of the hierarchy basically between the groups, it was difficult for consensus because certain people had perceived seniority.
Mm-hmm. So power dynamics showed up.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think kind of goes both ways with a large group is that there's more opportunity for voices to be heard. So more like a difference of voices, but also with that, those voices can easily get lost as well. So again, you've got the stronger voices or those louder voices shouting over the other ones.
Yes. So benefit is the diversity of voices that can show up. And the challenge is that still some voices will not speak up, or they will be, you know, like we were just talking about before with Chloe's questions and Ailsa's comment, is some voices will show up strong and some voices won't. And if I'm facilitating a group like this, I might call on, this person, that person, and that person, and they'll speak. It won't necessarily be rounds. I'll just be calling stack. And some people will want to speak over and over again, and some people won't speak at all. Joy?
Sorry, one positive of it happening in the big group is that there's a degree of transparency, because everybody would witness the whole process,
So
imperfect as it may be.
It's transparent. Everyone is present to what's happening. And if you make a decision, then everybody's made a decision together. And so that's also a positive. Let's go to the next slide.
Hang on.
Yeah, not so easy. Supposing you were organized in small groups. So if this was the framework in which decisions were being made, what would be effective, useful, nice about this, and what might be challenging? Again, unmute at will and speak. Gordy.
If it was kind of negative, or it would be perhaps if it was a smaller group, self-interest may come into play.
That in a particular group?
Yeah, in one particular group, self-interest may come into play.
So a small group might skew things more towards they want and ignore perhaps the needs of the rest.
The commonality, yeah.
Yeah, the commonality. Sorry. Okay, Jean-Mathieu.
Group members will know each other better, so strengths and areas of weaknesses. So they will know if they want to build capacity, like if it's a lighter role, or if they want somebody more skilled in that domain, just so because it's very important to the group. So they would know each other better.
So they could be more effective in their work based upon knowing each other and being able to make decisions and role allocations based upon that knowledge of each other.
I was
might be. Oh yeah.
No, Mary, you go.
I was just going to say, might be a bit, more likely that a bit of group think can happen in the smaller group as well. Over familiarity, so get complacent.
Less diversity of opinion in the smaller group might lead to more kind of shallower level decision making. Gordy?
I think on the positive side, it would allow it would be less intimidating for those who were less inclined to in public forum.
Yeah, sort of a safer space to speak than in a group of 40. Yeah. And Ailsa?
I was thinking that the different groups, if they're all, addressing the same question at the same time, could go off on very different tangents, and perhaps, or come up with just really just opposing that it would be, the four groups could kind of create complexities that wouldn't occur if there were a bigger group together, because the three groups wouldn't hear what one,
Yeah, we don't know what each other's doing.
Yeah.
And so then we might miss out. We may work at cross purposes.
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
we're not mutually informed. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. This is meant to represent sort of the traditional hierarchy, with the red dot being the boss and the 3 departments. What works well about this kind of decision-making structure, and what might be some of its challenges?
I suppose some people would think, okay, we know where we stand. I don't have to think too much for myself. I get my orders, I go and do it.
So clarity, real nice clarity here, unlike the previous 2 designs, perhaps there's more clarity here. You know where you stand, you know what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the losses is a lack of creativity, and how creativity can bubble up in a group, and this format isn't going to facilitate that.
It's not a context that welcomes innovation and creativity here. Any other things that come up, Dominique?
More likely to stick with the status quo.
So, and why is that?
Well, I guess, I mean, considering it's a traditional hierarchy and traditional powers and are at play, and that tends to go with traditional ideas and such, and what has led us to the situation we're in.
It's sort of like what somebody just said before, is it's more risk averse. You know your place, you'll do your job, but you don't want to do anything that's kind of outside your role in some way, because then you might get called upon it. And you stepped out of line, you get punished. Joy?
Yeah, that suppose mine's quite similar to what you just said, that it isn't a safe space for people to participate in because of the risks involved. So yeah.
Yeah. And if let's say I'm the CEO, I'm that red dot, and I ask my vice president, how's it going in your department? What's my vice president going to say?
Fine.
Fine, right? It's going great. And this is kind of the context of all the, you know, the scandals, as I think I might have said the last session I was in, that people cover up and they pass the blame on further down. And what is the innovation here when the person at the end of the line is someone who's perhaps directly facing with customers, and they have a piece of knowledge that doesn't get translated up? So the flow of information may be limited because of the hierarchy and the tensions that come with it. Let's go to the next slide. So you can draw this, you know, another way of drawing the hierarchy is just drawing it this way. It's a different way of looking at it. So there's the CEO in the center and the 3 departments. And, you know, everybody's got their place, the vice president of the department, all the way down to the lowest ranking person in the group. And if you think about, and to play out what sociocracy is like, it kind of actually builds on multiple worlds. So if you take that row, you know, like take the little blue row and you start looping it around to almost make it look like a flower. And let's see if that the next slide I think might. So you can remember that those were 3 straight lines coming out from the red dot. Now imagine you curve that line and to make it each one of those lines becomes a circle. So all the greens are one unit, one department, one circle. All the purples are one unit and all the blues are one unit. So each of those is a small unit having the benefits of being the small group. Then each of those has a leader and a delegate, and the purples, leader and delegates, and along with the red dot being the kind of the coordinator of the group, that becomes your coordinating circle, or what we often call in sociocracy the general circle, or I think in XR you call it the anchor circle. So this is a circle that's composed of the leaders and delegates of its primary department. And you can sort of face, if the leaders and delegates face into the middle, they're meeting with the coordinating circle, the anchor circle. If they face out, then they're meeting with their small group. And you can sort of see that represented here. So we've got the circle in the middle, that's your coordinating circle, and it's got leaders and delegates that connect to a subcircle. And that subcircle can connect to yet another level of subcircle. And this is like a fractal, meaning this can be an endlessly repeating framework where every circle is connected to a parent circle, if you will, by its leaders and delegates, and 2 child circles through its leaders and delegates. And within each circle, people have roles that they might be playing. So if you have you know, a circle over here on one side, that might be the social media circle of SCAN, and then within the social media circle, one person may have responsibility for Facebook, somebody else may have responsibility for Instagram and TikTok, somebody else may have responsibility for, you know, LinkedIn or whatever. You know, have the different roles of responsibility. And what we're doing with each of these circles and then with each of the roles is clarifying that each unit has an aim, has a purpose of what it's trying to do that you can describe, and each unit has a domain or area of responsibility where it has authority to act. So aims and domains is a really key piece of the Sociocratic framework. And so it might say, okay, social media circle, that's your aim. Your aim is to promote, you know, the SCAN's work in social media and get people to, you know, through social media, get people to the next event. Your area of authority is within that sets of media. So if it's social media, it's not in your role to be communicating with the newspapers or the TV stations. That's somebody else's work. But your area is social media, and you have a budget of, you know, whatever it is, £1,000, you know, pounds or something, to create your Instagram or TikTok things, or, you know, spend on whatever it is you need to do to get the access. And if you want to spend more than that $1,000, then it requires approval from the parent circle, where the other groups that are involved can say, sure, it would make sense for you to spend more money, or, well, no, but then we don't have the money for this other thing that's important. So we need to figure out together things that go above and beyond your area of authority so that we can jointly figure out how to best move the whole. And you see there's another gray circle here on top. I've been talking about the general circle, or the anchor circle, or the coordinating circle, and its subcircles and subcircles. Many organizations will also have their board of directors, or what we in Sociocracy sometimes call the top circle, or what we prefer in SOFA calling it the mission circle. So the board of directors is looking at more the longer term view, the future of the group, the bigger picture, and not so much with the day-to-day management like the coordinating circle, anchor circle would be. So that's kind of the difference between those two, the longer term, wider perspective versus the coordinating circle, managing the day-to-day and what's going on, making sure that things are flowing. In a well-functioning, mature, relatively static organization, the general circle winds up having not much to do because the work has been distributed out. In a very dynamic organization where things are constantly changing, then that coordinating circle does have work to do, because it's like, oh, you know, now we want to create a new department. Oh, we got to figure that out. Oh, this has happened in the world and we got to figure out our response to that. So there may be lots of things in a very dynamic organization that the general circle needs to be doing. And this, you can see the dotted line, and that's kind of just wanting to reflect that how information is still flowing throughout the organization. That unlike the brokenness of the small groups that are not connected, when you have the groups connected through the double link and not just a single link, then that information can be flowing. The delegate of the one group can be reporting to the parent circle of, here's what's going on in our circle. The leader is reporting from the parent circle to the child circle, here's what's going on in the rest of the organization. And so that information flow can happen as needed. And just to say, of course, all the leaders and delegates, they're all selected by consent. So the leaders of delegates of the sub-circle are selected by consent by that sub-circle. And then because they're going to be members of the parent circle of that parent circle will also confirm that they consent to those people being in those roles. Because no circle can have membership imposed on it. One of the elements of sociocracy is defined membership. Every circle is clear on who its members are. So it's not a drop-in situation. If you have a drop-in situation, then you don't have control over making your decisions. It's like, oh, I hear, that the action group is going to make a decision about X. I want to go there and say no to them, even though I've not been part of that group for the last 3 years. But I'll just walk in, drop in, and do my piece as if I was a member. No, that doesn't work. You need to have ongoing relationships where you get to know each other, where you struggle through this stuff together, and you have a reliable, consistent membership. It still can be open membership. You can bring in new people, that's fine, but you're doing that intentionally and by consent. Any circle has a responsibility, and with the responsibility comes, every circle has authority in their domain, and with that authority comes a responsibility to get appropriate level feedback. So you're not completely on your own. You just don't do things without consulting others. And it depends upon the level of decision making that you're doing. If it's a small decision, you go ahead without getting any feedback. If it's a really big decision, you want to make sure that you're communicating with lots of other parts of the organization. You might do surveys, you might do, bring things up in many different ways. So one circle making a decision may simply communicate with its parent or its child circle to get more feedback on the decision they're trying to make. Or you can communicate laterally to a sibling circle and saying, we're trying to make this decision, you got any feedback for us? Like the marketing circle and the sales circle may want to communicate with each other. The social media circle and the, whatever it's called, the print media circle may want to communicate with each other from time to time. You can create a helping circle to do some research or to get a proposal organized together and bring it back. And so that group may not have any authority other than come with a recommendation back to us to make a decision. And you can create a new subcircle to carry on work. So many different ways to get support and get feedback for the decisions you're trying to make. This is significant because trust is based upon the belief that the authority that we've distributed out to groups is being handled with honor. An example of that is that there was a co-housing community that I trained. They adopted Sociocracy, and almost as soon as they adopted Sociocracy, the group that was responsible for the common house, their common building that they shared, went and changed the function of the kids' room to I think a multi-purpose arts and crafts room. The next day, some people came and went into the spaces and went, wow, that room just got changed. Who decided that? They have the authority to do that? Oh, I don't like Sociocracy because, it shouldn't, Okay, what happened there is they made a decision without getting appropriate level feedback. Changing a room, as key room as that was in the community, would have a lot of impact, and they should have gotten the feedback. And the feedback that they would have gotten was, yes, we don't have any kids right now, but we're really committed to having kids in our community. So to get rid of the kids' room is giving a message to the wider world that we're not interested. So we need to have that kids' room available, open, and keep inviting all our friends with kids to come and play and make it something really inviting. So that was the lesson learned. Get your feedback, when you're going to do something that's going to impact others. And making it really clear that feedback is not the same thing as decision making. So, for example, again, in my co-housing community, my circle community life might go to the whole community at a full community meeting and say, we're thinking of making this decision. We would love your feedback. Thank you for your feedback. We're going to take it back to our circle and make the decision there. I think I've talked a little bit about circles and roles. I mean, the roles already a little bit, but every circle would have a leader. That's one of the roles. And some people don't like the word leader. It's too evocative of power over. And so they might use the word guide or coordinator. But I want to caution people that leadership is, leadership is good. Leadership is useful. We wouldn't be where we are without leadership. It's the abusive leadership that we don't like, and you correct for that with feedback, rather than going to a no leaders kind of mentality. The delegate is the second voice that is brought from any circle to its parent circle. And the value and importance of that is a check, in a sense, on the power over potential of having a single person be the one. Because if I'm the leader, I may report always to the parent circle what I want to see, what I think are the priorities, how I think the group is doing. But if the delegate is present, then we have more of the truth. Because the delegate can say, well, that's not exactly how I experience it. So both voices create a better, a fuller picture of what's going on. In a large organization or in a organization that's really based on volunteers, sometimes it's hard to get to the double link, as we call it. But at the more broadly focused levels of the organization, it becomes more and more important to have that, to make sure that that information is going to flow. The secretary, or we call sometimes the circle administrator, is taking care of the notes, keeping the files current, making sure that we know what should be on the agenda from the past, and making sure that everybody is clear on what's been decided. The facilitator, who does not need to be the same person as the leader, is moderating the meetings. I want to show you a few examples of organizational structures. This is kind of modeled after my own Pioneer Valley Cohousing community where I live. So we have 4 main departments: buildings and grounds, it takes care of the roofing and the siding and the roads. The gardens and the land circle takes care of the trees and the orchard and the chickens and whatever we have on the land. And the common house circle, like I was just describing, takes care of the shared building that we have, where we have meals, or we have all sorts of rooms for different activities. So they do the policies about the use of that. And then community life, which happens to be the one that I sit on, takes care of the people-related things. And some of these circles then have sub-circles. So the common house has a kitchen sub-circle that manages the kitchen, which is a key part of our community life, is the meals that we share. Community life may have multiple sub-circles. One is dealing with organizing community work, another one with membership, another one with house sales, another one with care and counsel, which means how do we care and support for the members of our group, whether they break a leg or there's a conflict, deals with those kinds of things. And then when you think of if you draw a circle around everything, that's everybody in the community, which we call, well, actually, here's what sorry, ahead of myself with the slide deck. Again, just pointing that every circle's got double links, and there's roles within the circles. So, for example, I'm the cartwright. I fix carts. That's just a role. So there are roles that are assigned within circles. And we would have a mission circle, also known as the board of directors, that meets the legal requirements that we may have, but does not have power in the way we think of boards of directors having power over the organization. Because after all, they also make decisions by consent, and they are composed of leaders and delegates or people who've been selected to play roles in that mission circle. And we have the full circle, meaning the entire community, And we do have entire community meetings, like you might have entire SCCAN meetings from time to time. And why would we do that? It is not to make decisions in general, but it is to do things like have a workshop and learn, to do connection, to spend time getting to know each other as a community, and perhaps to give feedback to circles that are trying to make decisions and they could use more input. So here, I'm not going to talk through this particular slide, but once you have circles and circles have aims and domains, you want to name those and write those down so they're clearly available and understandable to people. What are those aims and domains of each circle? So that's what this is, a table of aims and domains. Here's a different organization. This is a restaurant, and they do a lot. It's a bakery and restaurant. So they do breakfast and lunch, and they have 4 departments: the bread makers, the pastry makers, the back of the kitchen where they're making the meals, and the front of the house where they're serving the customers. So each of those have their autonomy in that area and their budget in that area. They have leaders and delegates that they have selected. And sometimes leaders are appointed from general circle or coordinating circle, in a sense, down to the child circle, and sometimes they're appointed the other direction. Either way is okay. Know that both have to consent. And because this is a co-op, this is a worker-owned cooperative, in the bottom half of this picture, they're as workers. But in the top part over here, you see another circle called worker owners, where they're wearing their ownership hat on, which is a different kind of interest than simply the work. This is where they talk about their pay, they talk about what they want to do with surplus, what does it mean to be a member, what are the policies about new members, or what's it called, the period of time you have to spend before you become a vested member. So there's a number of concerns as owners that they get to talk there. And then they have their input as owners into the board or the mission circle, and in a similar but different hat on, then they would have input into the board as workers. So this also looks like, if you think of different stakeholders, if you have an organization with different stakeholders, who are the parents in a school might be a circle like this, or the community organization that you want to be connected to might be a circle like this in your organization. And then, as is typical with boards, you may have some outside people. The outside people are key because they bring in your fresh air. That means you don't go stale within the group because you have new information coming in from their experience. In this case, for example, this is a co-op, a worker co-op, and the community contact here was the executive director of the regional co-op organization. And the outside person from this food related was one of the people on the board of the local food cooperative that sold the baked goods and some of the things that the co-op produced. So there's, again, we used to talk about in the old days about the interlocking system of directorates of the capitalist organizations that were all organized to extract as much as possible from the working people. Well, the same thing applies in this way, the interlocking system of directorates for cooperation. So how can these different entities mutually reinforce each other? And Jean-Mathieu, you have your hand up?
Thanks, Jerry. Just a point which also is reflected at SCCAN, we are also experiencing a similar situation. What if the front house, for example, has got a decision which will influence on the kitchen group? Do they necessarily have to kind of communicate that through the general circle, or basically how do sub-circles communicate amongst each other if they need to?
Yes, so in any multiple ways. So one is if the decision that the front of the house wants to make is going to affect the kitchen, It might be that there's simply the leaders of those two circles talk to each other. And it may be a fairly informal process. Let's make sure that we're clear about this. Okay, looks good, great. It may be that they have a joint meeting between those two circles to work something out. Or it means that the two of them bring their issue to the general circle and discuss it there, because it has it has implications for the whole. So you take it to the widest level, whatever you're doing that has impact, then you take it to the widest level where everyone's efforts are impacted by it.
Good, thank you.
Comment about evolution. Often we start with a very small group of people, the founders, the few friends that want to start something. As they progress, they start developing roles. So that's the dotted lines, reflects the roles. You do marketing, I'll do administration, I'll do the production. And then from there it grows, and okay, it's not a single role anymore. We have to create sub-circles too, because now there's more people involved. And so there's a group of 3 or 4 people doing the production and 5 or 6 people doing the promotion, etc. And from there it can grow. You can no longer do the day-to-day management and the long-term thinking all in the same group. So you make sure that you separate out roles between the mission circle and the general circle. So both the bigger picture can be attended to and the day-to-day can be attended to. And from there, it can just keep growing. I won't go through this diagram, but this is Sociocracy for All. We have somewhere in here, here's our mission circle and our general circle in the purples. And then we have the membership department that is more kind of the administrative support. And we have the content department that produces slide decks and training programs and all the rest and does the outreach work. We have ecosystems where we are applying sociocracy to different areas. Applying sociocracy to co-ops, applying sociocracy to permaculture, to schools, to nonprofits, to climate crisis work. The international area where we have the sociocracy in Denmark and sociocracy in the Spanish-speaking areas and so on. So, and this is a dynamic process. We have grown tremendously over the last 5-6 years, and so this diagram changes almost every few months. Something new happens. And I think that is, let's see, that is, oh yeah, here's one more thing I wanted to say. Just variations on organizational structure. We seek double linking when we can, but we can do a single link when it's difficult to do. And there are variations of how to do this. The important piece here is that you want to preserve that every voice matters. And so it might be that, okay, in general, we have a single link, but every once in a while, we'll send a second person to that parent group because there's an issue that we need to have more voices in than just our leader. Another is just a clarity of what's the difference between a circle and a community of practice. A circle makes policy. A community of practice is not for policy making. It's a place where let's gather all the facilitators of the different circles together so they can talk about the challenges that they're facing as facilitators. And so it's a give and take of support among each other, but they're not trying to make any policy. So that's one example of community of practice. Another example is, you might bring all the leaders of your different SCAN groups and say, what's going well for you, what's challenging for you, and people share their stories. So you get that learning process that can happen there that needs a different space than the constant attention to decision making that you would have in circles that are oriented to making decisions. And as I just said earlier, there may be different kinds of stakeholder circles that you have for input that might be flowing into your mission circle, like parents giving input to the mission circle of a school, or community organization, the town giving input to your XR chapter or whoever you decide are key stakeholders in the work that you're trying to do. How do you bring their voice in again, so that you are not isolated in your thinking? And cross-cutting, cross-team helping circles. That sometimes you might, if you're doing campaigns, there are times we want to bring somebody. Okay, let's have somebody from the social media and from the action group and from the community organizations to all come together and do some work together to come up with a proposal that we all need to look at, because we need that cross feedback from everybody.